Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I am Sean Butler. Bugsy Malone's over there in the lake having a swim, so it's just me right now, but she'll be over in a minute, and I'm sure you'll hear her when she starts to bark. I hope you are all happy and healthy, doing the things that you love with those that you love doing them with. Guys, please do me a favour, as you always do. You really do smash it out of the park. Once again, yesterday, 1,500 likes or more, I think. Thank you so much. It helps the channel find new people, and I'm so grateful for your support ongoing. Hit the subscribe if you are new around these here parts. If you are new, what you can expect is generally daily walks with the dog, the occasional live stream, but always talking about whatever's going on in the world of Tottenham. And we try to cover both sides of the argument as best as possible, look at the pros and cons, and then I'll give you where I land on it, but I'm really more interested in where you land. So make sure you drop a comment on whatever the topics are today and give me your thoughts. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm somewhere near the point, but I'm missing something, or if I'm forgetting something, like you did yesterday. And I have to apologize. I'm so embarrassed. I went through a pretty moody update yesterday, sort of talking about the noise with Fabrizio Romano and the fact that he's suggesting that there is going to be only one forward. And if that's the case and it's likely to be a striker, then God, our wing options look really kind of disappointing next season. And of course, it was the very first comment that came in and probably then repeated about 50 more times throughout the day. When I was mentioning all of the options in the scenario where we sign a striker but not another winger, I completely forgotten about Heung Min's son. I know I'm humiliated. I even thought about deleting the video, but you have to just own it. So I'm kind of wearing that mistake on, proudly on my chest today. I do apologise. Of course, with Sonny in the mix, in the options, then it feels a lot better. I still believe, for what it's worth, that and he is the best forward we have. He's the best winger we have, and you could make an argument that in certain scenarios he's the best striker that we have as well. Although I would make the argument that it is time that Tottenham need to figure out who that long-term successor is. The guy is going to be 32 soon, and I do think it has been noticeable that when he's playing on the left, his willingness to take players on has sort of dropped off a little bit. The frequency in which he could do a kind of push and run is happening fewer and fewer times. When he plays in the 9, he doesn't suit the way that this template has emerged against us, and he's not very good back to goal. And so the argument that even with Sonny now being remembered and factored into our options in the forward line next season, I'm still going to stick to my guns and say that Tottenham absolutely need a better number 9 than what we have, and a better winger that's a take-on specialist than what we have. I feel better, remembering that Sonny's there, but I still feel like there are weaknesses in the overall strategy that allows for the template that has emerged to be used against us, whereby the back four can kind of sit quite narrow when we have the ball, as opposed to how the season started. In the first 10 games, when the wingers were playing up and literally hugging the touchline, the opposition's defence was more spread because they had to consider the risks of the width. And then all it would take would be a Bissouma to break the line, or a Maddison to break the line, or someone to break the first part of the line, and then everything would open up, and we had some really good results that came from it. Eventually, it was figured out, these wide guys aren't as threatening as we thought they were, so let's give them the space, and let's narrow everything else. And then what created was horseshoe football, and obviously we struggled for the second half of the season. That template won't change until the threat changes from the width. So if you have a better striker that's better at movement, better at first touch, then when they do go narrow and we can control the ball better, have less dispossessions, then better outcomes can happen, even with the horseshoe football, even with the narrow approach. But when you also have better wingers that can take the game on and take the ball on and dribble at the defenders, at the fullbacks, then you'll find that eventually they will need to double up, and eventually they will need to spread and split the defence again. And then obviously you then have more space for players like James Maddison or whoever the 10 will be in the game, and players around him, the 8s, to be able to fill in the gaps and create those triangles more narrowly. And good things can happen, but one doesn't happen without the other. And so for me, regardless, you still need a better take-on specialist and a better 9 than what we have. You also need obviously a left-sided centre-back and a replacement for Royal, and a midfielder that can protect and do the things in transition that we haven't been able to do, which is protect that back two, back three, and hopefully sort of concede 25 fewer goals. If we do that, then everything can be fantastic for Tottenham next season. So where I wanted to go with today's video, guys, is essentially a little bit of a comparison with regards to Tuesday morning's Tottenham news, views and clues. So I've seen in a few different places. First and foremost, Nico Williams, that deal is not over according to many of the, I guess, more respected but yet still aggregators, that Tottenham are still very much interested in him. He is still very much looking for, you know, his opportunities, considering what's out there. Obviously, the problem around his wages is something we'll have to consider, but it's nice to see that and nice to, you know, be reminded this morning after yesterday's kind of doom and gloom approach by myself. And again, I apologize, it's not usually my style. That we are potentially still going to go out there and get that winger that can do all the things that we just talked about, all of the attacking threat from the width where fullbacks can't just overlook and ignore and give these guys 2 or 3 yards to run at. So it's nice to see that. I've seen more links to Dani Olmo. Remember, he had a 61 million euro, I think that's a 55 million pound release clause, and that story is still there, although we are no longer at the top of the list. Bayern Munich are probably favourites for his signature. I'd be very surprised if he was to come to Tottenham. As I said to you on a previous video, as much as I'd love him, because I think he would be absolutely sensational, for the money, it makes sense. But I think that from the player's side, the buyer's side, and the seller's side, I think that there'll be a long list of competition and what might, you know, if on how that ends up being with him wearing a Tottenham shirt, I would consider it unlikely. So I'm going to park that story until I see more from it. Morgan Gibbs-White is back in the news to Tottenham. And I was thinking, look, let's have a consideration, a little conversation here around what's the benefits, the cost-benefit analysis, given that yesterday's methodology was talking around how much money do we have? Obviously, we don't know, right? But from my calculations, I would imagine it's not going to be an out-of-the-ordinary window because of the second season without Champions League revenue. So I think it's somewhere between 100 and 120 million of net spend before sales. When I listed the sales out, I was talking about, you know, the likes of Hojbjerg and Hill. I did forget players like Serge Reguilon on that list, and we'll include him. But also today, for what it's worth, there's noise out about Hojbjerg and the fact that Jose Mourinho has entered the race or entered the consideration phase of looking at him at, he's out in Fenerbahce. Now, first of all, I don't believe that Hojbjerg would go to Turkey, even to work under Mourinho, simply because, you know, he fancies himself playing at the very highest level. And whilst Fenerbahce are one of the very highest level teams in Turkey, I'm not sure if he would consider the Turkish league to be, you know, of his standard. Does he want to go out there and do that? I don't know, but my gut tells me no. So I'm probably going to imagine that that's a kind of a dead link. However, in that article and about 2 or 3 others that were all talking about the same thing, they all were talking about Hojbjerg being £15 million valuation, not the 25 that I had him down for. And so if that takes away 10 million from the budget, just, well, obviously no one knows, but it's all hypotheticals, then obviously that makes our business kind of what we need to do and how much money we can spend doing it a little bit difficult. Now, for what it's worth, there was other news out regarding Dominic Solanke. He's been on the list of Tottenham Hotspur's potential transfer wish lists, and he's got a release fee. Bournemouth apparently have no intention of selling him, but he does have a release fee of £65 million, which is a lot of money, and I think is too rich for Tottenham's veins, and I wouldn't want to see Tottenham spend it on him anyway. I think there's too much of an unknown around the consistency and the, you know, you won't know until you know whether or not the latest version of Dominic Solanke is the forever moving forward version of Dominic Solanke. It's his first season where he really broke out, and he did very, very well, and it shouldn't be understated or overlooked or even sort of undermined that 19 goals in the Premier League for a Bournemouth team was very, very impressive. But 65 million quid's a lot. Regardless of whether or not, you know, Daniel Levy and Ange Postecoglou agree, apparently 65 million pound is the release fee, but it only counts to one team, and that's Liverpool, who sold him to Bournemouth a while back. So I'm not even sure if Tottenham wanted to trigger it. They could, according to the rules. But anyway, let's get back to the point. So Morgan Gibbs-White is back in the news, right? Morgan Gibbs-White to Tottenham. And then I was thinking, well, again, it's either going to be a him or an Eze. Let's consider the value propositions of both. let's have a look. I'll throw the kind of relative stats up over the screen so you can see them. And then I'll put like an overlay of their pentagrams or whatever you want to call it, pentagons, so that you can see just generally in the areas of the game that I would consider most important, and that there will be a custom pentagon, whether or not, you know, statistically, the gap in valuations would be worth the drop-off in output. And for me, when you look at the two players, I'm a massive fan of Morgan Gibbs-White. I spent a long time last night looking through his compilations through YouTube mainly. And one of the things that stands out to me is that he kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Dele Alli, in that he loves, when he first receives the ball, loves a little bit of trickery, loves to nutmeg players, loves to kind of do some sort of dance. I forget the names of the tricks, but when you're doing the back heel stuff all the way through. And the obvious other biggest criteria for him is driving with the ball. He absolutely loves to drive with the ball, but he does look up, and his ability to find a final ball or pass to continue the move after he's done his bit is right up there. And that's why I do look at him and think he's a young guy who I believe has the potential in his skill set, his technique, his intelligence of what makes the difference between the good and the great, or the very best and the next level down. I think he does have it. And according to the reports I'm reading this morning, £40 million to £45 million is what Nottingham Forest would expect to get for him. And when you compare and contrast him to Eberechi Eze, which is £68 million, 60 on the release and 8 million in add-ons, performance add-ons, then it kind of gives you a basis for comparison. Now, as you'll see from the stats, and especially when I put the overlay over the two, you'll see that Eberechi Eze is basically an outperformer in every department, in most of the departments of what you want from an attacking midfielder, with the possible exception of driving with the ball and take-ons and sort of progressive carries. I think that is Morgan Gibbs-White's standout sort of area. In terms of like tackles and getting back and the press and all those sorts of things, trying to get the ball back and win back from the dispossession, I think it's negligible. I think both of them have that fight, that grit, that determination, and a desire to get stuck in. And I think that Tottenham need one or two additional players in that regard. We've got players that get wound up easily, you know, from the likes of Mope doing the dart celebration. But I think I don't see that as grit and determination. I see that as a little bit childish, if I'm honest, and immature. And I think there needs to be maturity amongst the grit and determination. And I think that Gibbs-White shows that to me. And I also think that Eze does as well. So when it comes down to the valuations, 40 versus 65, 68, it's a big difference. And when you bake in, like the theme of yesterday's conversation, what are our relative budgets in all likelihood going to be? And as I said, I believe they're 120 million at the top end, plus your sales, unless Daniel Levy has a biopsy, a lobotomy, and the change of habits of a lifetime, and decides to throw additional risk this particular season. But you've seen the outcome of that from teams like Forest and obviously teams like Everton, where it's completely fallen apart. If the results haven't generated the additional revenues and success, then it ends up being a problem that you'll have to face in a couple of years' time. And even Aston Villa, where you have seen the success of the overspend, they now have to make difficult decisions around cutting loose probably one of their more higher caliber level players, in order to make sure that they don't get hit by unnecessary penalties next year. So for me, I love Eze. I still make the same point, though, that I don't know where he fits in. I don't think he naturally fits the left wing. I don't think obviously Gibbs-White does either. Gibbs-White is more of a 10 as well. But I think Gibbs-White has probably got more of an ability to sit a little bit deeper and play that tenacious role. So I think that there's also versatility in Gibbs-White, but at only 60% of the cost. I'd love to know your thoughts. For me, I think that it all depends on what you want to do elsewhere. If Ivan Toney, as I said to you a couple of days ago, is a good enough striker in your mind, and the risks around his addiction, the risks around his personality, the risks around whatever it was that made him fall off of a cliff in the second half of the season with his output, was it the absence of familiarity of the football and he's just ring rusty, but it will come back? Or has that whole experience had some real impact on him on his psyche that, you know, you just don't know what you're going to inherit. There's lots of risks there, but at £40 million, I think there's value, and I think that that then justifies you to be able to go and do something else with regards overspending on a player that is not just going to be able to figure out some way to be a massive impact in this system, like an Eze will. Like I have absolute faith that we'll make it work with Eze, but at the same time, you're buying these players. You have to always keep one eye on the future. You're buying an Eze, or you're buying a GIBBS-WHITE, or you're buying a, you know, these kids that are 23 and under. You're buying them on 5-year, maybe 6-year deals, some of them. And you know that that generally means, and I hope it doesn't mean it in the case of Ange Postecoglou, but generally speaking, statistics don't lie. Generally speaking, unless you are a Klopp, a Wenger, a Ferguson, a David Moyes, unless you're one of these guys that have sort of broken the mold and stayed at their football clubs for 10 years or more, the chances are the average tenure of a manager in the Premier League, I think right now is 15 months, 14 months, something stupid like that. I think last season it was 12 months. But the chances are that you're not just thinking about, well, is this player going to suit Ange's system, but is he going to be a big part of Tottenham's future for the next 2, maybe even 3 managers? And you'd love to see and think that Eze will be an asset in whichever the next system will be. And so you can get on board it. Do I want him more than GIBBS-WHITE? I do want Eze more than GIBBS-WHITE. And I'm okay with Eze and the money being spent if we can make the rest of the money work. And this is where I've got to go with the next part of the conversation, because there's 2 other stories today that keep percolating. One of them is Hiroki Ito. And obviously I've mentioned this guy a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I think it was, on this channel. I was doing some research and I found him and I thought this guy would be a perfect fit for Conte's system. Then when Ange came in and the Japanese connection, I was like, oh, maybe Ito would be the good guy, a good idea. Now he's everywhere because of his performances last season for Stuttgart that made them finish 2nd. He's been a brilliant, brilliant player, and he's brilliant on the ball. I've shown you the stats before. I'll throw them up again like I always do, just so you can be reminded. I think he'd be fantastic. He's got a release fee of £25 million. And for me, the valuation there, the value for money, the value proposition is a no-brainer. I think that even though his defensive stats look weak, like I said before, his positional play, his intelligence, and the way that they ask him to play, it allows for less contributions in that department. But when he has to do it, I always see, when I look into it, I always see him, generally speaking, with the superiority battle with whoever he's playing against. And so the question mark is whether or not you'd go for him versus the other link, which is coming out again today, which is Murillo from Forest. Again, Nottingham Forest need to sell somebody this summer. Is it going to be GIBBS-WHITE? Is it going to be Murillo? Is it going to be Hudson-Odoi? I don't think Hudson-Odoi, even if they get £25 million for him, the fact that I think he has a 50% sell-on fee back to Chelsea, that doesn't move the needle enough. So it's going to be one of GIBBS-WHITE or Murillo, in my opinion. Now, Murillo at 21, 1 season in the Premier League from Corinthians, has been an absolute beast. The guy is incredible. He gets forward, his ability to drive with the ball, he's got that natural Brazilian flair. He's got a left foot, so he's left-footed, so it suits the balance of the system. He can break the line. Talking about the things we were speaking about at the start of the video, the ability for somebody to break the first line in a high press against us opens things up. And if you had him in there, plus you have someone on the left wing that's better than what we have, or on the right wing that's better, that creates that requirement for the back 4 to be more considerate and therefore spread half a yard or 2 yards. That gives more space for Maddison. The compounding effects and benefits of a couple of these additions will transform our season next year. And for me, Murillo is someone whose passing stats do not compare or compete in any way with Hiroki Ito. But in terms of the defensive stuff, Murillo's fantastic. He's phenomenally strong in most of the departments defensively. Good in the air, he's fast, he's quick, he's a bully, doesn't give away too many unnecessary fouls. He could solve our area, or be a part of the solve for our aerial issue. The superlatives I have for Murillo's first season at 21, I could go on and do it for another 10 minutes. I really do fancy the player. I don't fancy the price tag though, 60 to 70 million quid. And that therein is the problem once again. Tottenham have to make choices here with the budgets we have and the likely amount of money we can raise from sales. Where do you spend it and who do you spend it on? Is Murillo going to want to come in and play second fiddle third or fourth choice backup to Micky Van De Ven? Probably not. But you know what? If you can convince him to do it, you have a player in there that your back four then is unbelievably strong for the next 7, 8 years if you can keep them all happy. We do have to play more minutes, and I think Van De Ven's injuries will flare up. So it won't be like it has been for Dragusin this season, that the second that he came into the club, we no longer had any injury issues. We will have injury issues, we always do, and there'll be moments for all four of them. But for me, 70 million for Murillo, 60 million for Murillo, it's a little bit too rich. It's a shame because he's phenomenal, but when you compare and contrast the value proposition of him versus Ito, who can also double up as a left back, then to me it makes so much more sense. £25 million or euro release fee. He can play left-sided centre-back. He can play left-back. That allows you to make maybe 2 decisions regarding Ben Davies and Serge Reguilon. We've already lost Ryan Sessegnon. If you go and get Murillo, you're spending a lot of money on a brilliant player that's only going to be able to play 50% of the games at best anyway. And then you might have to spend another however many more millions on a left-back or keep one of Davies or Reguilon. And Reguilon, whilst a better fit at left-back than Davies, for me, whatever's happened in the relationship between Ange and Serge Reguilon, it was never on from day one. And so you're probably therefore going to see Ben Davies hang around. But if you sign Hiroki Ito, you can sell and maybe justify getting some decent cash and coin for both Davies and or Serge Reguilon. And consequently, you can then throw that money together to go after and justify not just Eze, but Ivan Toney, and also have enough left over to go and get a Nico Williams and be able to afford his extortionate salary. So I think the whole purpose of this video, guys, once again, 22 minutes, I apologize, but the whole purpose of this video is trying to figure out the best way to make the money move and make the money work that can solve for all we need. I don't think, as much as it's a lovely thought, that we're going to spend £250 million this summer. Certainly not net. You know, it would have to be 200 maybe plus a little bit if we can sell everyone that we want to sell at the prices we want to sell, which never happens anyway, but in an ideal scenario. And even then, you're still going to need to go and make adjustments to your dream selection, because if you had your first pick in every situation, then it would cost too much for our ability. So, but I think players like Hiroki Ito kill 2 birds with 1 stone at a very reasonable price. That allows you to raise more money for players that you're selling. That allows you to go after your better targets, your top targets in positions, even if they don't necessarily fit everything we want for them right now, bearing in mind that these players will be here long after Ange Postecoglou has likely left the club. They'll fit the next guy and the next guy after that. And so, you know, to me, I think there's some logic. Murillo, wonderful player, but if you pick between the two, I think you go for Ito. It makes more sense. Morgan Gibbs-White, a wonderful player. I really like him. I really do like him. But I think that there's more value in the long run by going after Eberechi Eze, and the justification, even at the high price point, is still there. Conor Gallagher, for what it's worth. Look, that story for me, I know I was talking about it all day yesterday, and I know Ange really wants him, but all of the noise today is that he's probably going to stay at Chelsea now and run his contract down because he doesn't want to leave and go to a rival, and he doesn't want to. He hasn't been offered a contract that's suitable for what he thinks he's worth, and so, you know, it's well within his best interests, obviously, then to just hang around and bide his time. That makes sense, especially as Chelsea got away with FFP and PSR. This is for another video, but the rules, when the Premier League got together last week and they were voting on the various amendments to the rules regarding VAR, Wolves put forward an amendment to scrap VAR, and that didn't get anything like enough support. Remember, you need to have 2/3 majority vote in favour. Wolves, I think, only got a handful of teams that agreed it, even though most fans, I think, feel more strongly, clearly, than the clubs do about VAR. But what was really interesting was there was an amendment put forward regarding the banning of selling your third-party infrastructure assets to sister companies that belong to the ownership. And it was all based out of the Chelsea selling the hotels to make ends meet for last season's FFP, and now they're apparently about to sell their training ground to another sister company in order to get by this FFP, which is why Chelsea don't apparently now have to sell anybody and can go out and buy players like Julian Alvarez and whoever else they're looking at. And it does make a mockery of the entire system. But what makes it even more frustrating is when you think in life, you know, when you look up to the very highest places, the people at the top, you know, like the people, you'd hope that the Prime Minister is intelligent. You'd hope that the CEOs of organizations that are multi-billion-pound organizations, you would hope that they are generally incredibly intelligent and that between them and their team and the stakeholders, they've kind of thought of everything before they put things down on paper and make statements and make the rules put in place. And in the case of the Premier League and the stakeholders, well, they are the teams. And yet every single time there are rules put in place, it comes across like the loopholes are always so obvious to the individuals within the teams who voted in favor or against something happening so that they can take advantage as soon as the rules are in place. And they put forward this amendment last week to stop teams like Chelsea selling infrastructure, and it was rejected. 11 teams approved it, 9 rejected it. They didn't get the 2/3 vote. But it wasn't rejected because there wasn't a general desire to see that implemented. It was rejected because the people that put the amendment together were too vague and broad with what they consider third-party infrastructure assets. And again, it just reminds me of yet another example of ineptitude at the highest level. These guys are paid fortunes, millions and millions and millions of pounds. You would expect them to cover their bases, to think of all of the I's and the T's and the various kind of loopholes that can be taken advantage of. And it's just like in life, the criminals are always one step ahead of the law enforcement. You know, there wasn't a crime to stop, it wasn't a law to stop theft before people started to steal. And to me, it winds me up that once again, the biggest teams, the best teams that are pushing the boundaries, they're getting away with it because of ineptitude rather than their brilliance that is allowing them to get away with it. It's the ineffective application of concentration and thought processes from the guys that are supposed to be doing what's in the best interest of the Premier League. And what's even more terrifying is that those sorts of scenarios support the idea of an independent regulator taking over and that those guys are going to do a better job. But when was the last time the government ever did a better job than the private industry that is generally run by capitalism? At least competition generally means that you get to efficiencies. There's so much waste and so much ineptitude in the government, and I don't know which is worse. Like, if the Premier League can't figure it out, what on God's green earth makes you think that a public official can either? They're all as bad as each other, and unfortunately, this is going to continue. The only teams that are going to get punished for FFP and PSR issues are the ones who show ambition, but it just doesn't quite work out and they get a little bit ahead of themselves or they make too many mistakes. But the teams at the very top that have got all of the wealth, all of the money in the world and can afford the very best, well, you know what? Those very best people are spending their time thinking about how to cheat the system, how to circumvent the rules rather than how to implement the rules that create a fair and balanced and equitable level playing field so that everybody has a better chance of success. But anyway, let me know your thoughts. GIBBS-WHITE versus Gallagher versus OLMO versus Eze. What about Murillo versus Ito? How would you spend your money if you could do it? And you know, you can't have the very best in every position. Let me know, guys. Like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.